and that's called future pacing. So we'll do that a little bit later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the 6-step reframe. We're going to take a break then, at which point hopefully Arpita will get her video working, and then you'll come back and work in pairs to practice it. And this is quite a long technique. You know, if you think all of the other ones you've done so far, they kind of take 5 minutes or so. This one, you could probably allow half an hour for. The demonstration might take a bit longer because I'll be talking to you while I'm demonstrating. 20 minutes would be quite reasonable for doing the 6-step reframe. 30 minutes is not unusual. And it's on page 322 in the book that I've got here. And some things to note about the 6-step reframe in general. First is there are 7 steps to it. So the original Society of NLP training materials, I found an old photo with a picture of the poster with we're on in the background, and it's absolutely true. It's 6 steps, and then it says future pace and test. Future pacing we'll talk about testing, check that it's get some sort of evidence that you think it has worked. So that's another step. So that makes it 7 steps in my mind. The future pacing part, what we're going to do is create a imaginary future scenario in which we can expect the behavior to drive the problem again. So, for example, if we've got somebody who needs attention, who craves and demands attention and does things for attention, here's Arpita. There's a video camera on. I can see you. I can see you, but I can't hear you now. So then we get them to imagine themselves in
Peter,
a scenario.
I have also joined from my mobile, so at least my video can be on from my mobile.
Right, we can see you and hear you. Fantastic, well done. So we put them in a situation where we think they are likely to behave the same way as they did before, and we look for the kind of things that they do to respond to that. Now, if we just ask them cognitively what they're going to do differently, they will come up with a lovely sounding action list that all sounds perfect and all sounds great. They won't actually do any of it. So when we future pace, we're creating an imaginary scenario that we think is likely to recreate the problem. And what are we going to be looking and listening for? Because if they say, oh, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to behave like this and I'm not going to do that anymore and so on, and we think, oh, well, that sounds great. That all sounds good. That's not true. What are we really looking and listening for when we do future pacing?
They're talking like in the present tense, that the situation's happening now. Good.
So present tense, we're looking at them to stay in the present tense. And what else will they be doing?
Using techniques to distance it from themselves or disassociate.
Okay, so we might hear some dissociation going on. Very good. What else?
Get into the justification of why.
Wouldn't expect to see that. If somebody was doing that in future pacing, I wouldn't. Expect that to come in the kind of conversation we're having when we're future pacing.
Would you see less nominalizations, and so that it is it that they've got their picture moving rather than having stopped it?
Right. Okay. So you'll hear changes in their language and the way they're describing it. Very good. What sort of things will you see that will let you know that something's changed?
in terms of their sort of body language and facial expressions.
Yeah.
So they would be more positive. You might see, I suppose, some nodding, some smiling, all the sort of visual cues that they are positive about it or keen to move forward.
Right. And certainly that we'll see facial expressions and movements that are congruent. So, for example, we won't see them saying, yeah, that feels, yeah, much better. I'm definitely going to do that. Because that would be what?
It's incongruent because they're shaking their head.
That would be incongruent. And the incongruence tells us they're not perhaps telling us everything that's in their minds. Because one of the things that we can expect will come up in future pacing, and this is built into the 6-step reframe, one of the things that we can expect will come up is potential problems, potential obstacles. We can expect those to come up. It's one of the reasons why we're future pacing. We want to force those to the surface now, not wait till they're in the situation, then having to deal with it when they have no willpower and they're doing, you know, they're reacting to the situation, which is trying to push them back into their old behavior. So a couple of steps in the 6-step reframe that are really important to spend, to focus more of your time on. The first is step 1, identify the pattern of behaviors of change. That might seem like a really obvious thing. It's actually very, very easy at that point to focus on the wrong behavior and go off in the wrong direction. And the second step where it's worth focusing is step 4, create alternatives. Because it's easy to fall into the trap of looking for things that will work and viable solutions, things that would be good ideas. And that's not the purpose of what we're doing there. So it's the number of alternatives and the creativity of alternatives that's important there. Not whether they'll work or not how sensible they seem. And often if they seem viable or sensible or appropriate to the problem, that's a good sign that actually nothing's changed. So step 4 is when we really start to see if we've broken them out of the constraints of the old behavior. If we haven't, we'll get very few alternatives and they will seem plausible. And if we have broken them out of the old frame of reference of the problem, those alternatives will come out. We'll hear a lot of them. They'll come out very freely, and they'll be some of them will be a bit crazy. And so it's very important to hold in that point and push them until we get that free flowing creativity. Because without that, nothing will change. We're still constrained by the rules of the original behavior. So when do we use a 6-step reframe? It's when we've got those long-term repeating cycles of behavior. And the person might well come to you at a crisis point. But the first thing to do is take a step back from that and think, okay, this has happened before. You know, if any of you used to watch Battlestar Galactica, the 2001 new reboot series, all of this has happened before and it will all happen again. So whatever situation they're in right now, that's whatever has brought them into the conversation with you is something that it's a conversation they've had before and they will have it again. And by taking a step back from that, we can look at what's driving that cycle of behavior. And typically what you'll find is when we've got a repeating cycle, a pattern that repeats itself over long periods of time, that could be weeks, months, even years. Can anybody think of examples of the types of behavior that would go in a sort of cyclic pattern over long periods of time? Anybody shout some examples out?
Relationships.
Yeah, good.
Jobs.
Yeah.
Eating.
Eating, yeah, yo-yo dieting, very good. people getting into fitness crazes, joining a gym, then giving up, and then joining a gym, and then leaving, and joining a gym and leaving. And the gyms love that, of course. The gym's business model is based around people joining and not going. So there's another example of how the commercial world is exploiting the flaws in your personality. Not the flaws in your personality, but the flaws in every human, because there are certain tricks that your brain plays on you, and certain people have figured out how to make money out of those tricks by putting chocolate at the till and by incentivizing you to join a gym in January under the guise of New Year resolutions and things like that. So these sorts of long-term cyclic patterns of behavior, people who give up smoking and then something happens and they start smoking again, then they give up again, and so on and so forth. So these are the sort of things that would be a good fit for the six-step reframe. And really, following the script of the six-step reframe is almost an entire coaching session itself. Having said that, when you do it, I would like you to think about not just launching straight into the technique, but doing just a little bit of the gentle setup, bringing the person into the conversation like we talked about using the Milton language. And at the end as well, when you do the future pacing, that will happen naturally. But again, just think about how you can give it a smooth ending rather than say, right, we're finished, we're done. So step one is identify the pattern of behaviors change. And as I say, that needs a little bit of work, because what we're looking for is the first thing the person will talk about is not the behavior. They'll talk about the symptom. They'll talk about the result of the behavior. What we've got to get them to do is understand, or what we've got to figure out is, what are they actually doing that is causing that effect or that symptom? So for me to be able to go through this and demonstrate it, can anybody think of something in your life where there's this repeating pattern of behavior? You get yourself into a situation and then you think, right, I'm never going to do that again. And then it does happen again. You can think of an example.
Several.
Paul, are you happy to think of one of those examples for the purpose of me demonstrating with you?
Yeah.
Which one would you like to choose?
I'll go with thinking I'm going to diet to lose weight, but never doing it.
Okay, excellent. And so question for everybody is, what then, so Paul's give us a nice succinct description of the behavior. So what is the behavior that you would be looking to change? So based on what Paul said, what is the behavior to be changed?
Sorry, Paul, can you please repeat that problem once again, because I couldn't catch it.
Always planning to diet, but never actually doing it, and just carrying on eating as I do.
So
Is it procrastination?
That's a nominalization. It's a very generalized label for many different types of behavior. So we've got to think that's procrastination isn't a behavior. It's a judgment on a behavior.
Is it actually changing, like looking at what he eats? Because talking about how being on a diet to lose weight, it all depends what he's eating anyway. Does he need to change what he's eating?
So we could say the behavior that we're going to change is the behavior when he chooses what to eat. So that's a possibility. Anybody else?
What are the reasons you want to lose weight?
Okay, so see, losing weight a behavior?
no, that's the outcome.
Yeah, it's an effect that we'll notice that tells us that some behavior has taken place. But if we think in terms of behavior, eating a cheeseburger is very similar to eating a salad, but they will lead to different outcomes. But the act of eating it is no different. So eating can't be the behavior to change. because eating isn't the problem.
Is it when he eats, as in like if it's because he eats because he feels stressed, or he eats because there's an emotional element behind, and that's when he eats? Is that the
Okay.
behavior?
So that's an interesting angle, is again looking at what's driving the choice of eating, either when or what, or maybe a combination of the two. So the behavior could be deciding that it's time to eat.
But Paul described it almost as a lack of action.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
he says it's something he wants,
Yes.
but how much does he want it compared to the enjoyment of eating?
Right. So it's almost as if Paul is setting out to eat something that's more healthy for him. And then what?
He doesn't actually. So
Sorry, Christy?
then he doesn't actually want to eat that. He'd rather have the burger than the salad.
Right. So this is where it fits the six-step reframe, because it isn't a single behavior. It's two competing behaviors. So there's an intention to lose weight, whatever that means. And there's an intention to eat in a certain way, and they crash into each other because you can't have both at the same time. And when those two behaviors crash into each other, ultimately, one will win. Because if we just think of it from the point of view of pure calorie consumption, Paul always eats healthily. He always consumes a number of calories that would cause him to lose weight. And then what happens?
He walks past the cakes on the side.
You might say, Christy?
He walks past the cakes on the side.
Well, as anybody who's, successfully lost weight and so on, and all these diet experts will tell us, eating a cake isn't a problem. And you'll see this with people who go through this sort of yo-yo dieting thing. They'll say, oh, that's it. I've lost my will. I've done it now. I've had a cake. I've had a chocolate biscuit. Oh, that's it. That's my diet ruined. And then that's a signal to give up. And then they'll start again some weeks later. So we know that the number of calories isn't the problem. And we know, even if we look, let's say for the sake of argument, let's assume that Paul's diet was all cheeseburgers and chips and stuff. Even that isn't a problem. Even in a single meal, Paul will eat a number of calories that is low enough that he will lose weight. But then what happens?
Doesn't stop.
Eats more.
He keeps going. Yeah. And so it's easy to kind of lump everything into one and say, this is about eating the wrong things. It's not quite that simple. But if we think about this from the point of view of conflicting behaviors, I found a useful way to identify the right pattern of behavior is to think, what is he doing instead of the thing that he says he wants to do? Because what the client will do when you first ask them is they will tell you about the symptom. They won't tell you about the problem because they don't know what the problem is. They're only aware of the symptom. They're only aware of getting a result that's different to what they wanted and not knowing why that is. And then coming to a very generic, obvious conclusion, which is, well, it's obviously because I eat too much. It's obviously because I eat the wrong things. It's obviously because I don't exercise enough. And that's what they'll present you with. But that isn't the behavior to change. The behavior is, what is the thing that's interfering with that? Because, for example, if we just take it, and I find just in general with NLP, it's very useful to just take the world very, very literally. Because remember, the client will tell us a story about a reality that we can't see in front of us. So Paul will tell us about a situation where he doesn't stick to a diet, doesn't lose weight. that directly contradicts what we can observe right now. So what can we observe in Paul right now in this moment? We don't know that he's struggling to lose weight because he's only telling us that he is. We don't know that that's true. What can we actually observe right now?
He's not actually eating.
Correct. And therefore,
He's losing weight.
he is losing weight right now.
Or Coke Zero.
Now he's just put a few grams back on again.
No, Coke Zero.
Not in the sugar, but in the weight of the liquid that he's consumed. So he's now heavier than he was 5 seconds ago. So it'll take him another few minutes of breathing and maybe a trip to the toilet before he lost weight again, compared to when he stated the behaviors changed to us. So it's useful to think in terms of what is the person doing instead of the thing that they say they want. And it's almost as if there's these two parts of Paul. There's a part that wants to lose weight and look and feel a certain way, and there's a part that wants to eat certain things at certain times, and they can't coexist. And so the six-step reframe, like with the visual squash that we did, uses this metaphor that a person is made up of parts, and these parts have different jobs, they have different responsibilities, and we can even give them job titles. And we'll hear people talk about this naturally anyway. They'll say, oh, part of me wants to go back in the office, but part of me loves the freedom of working from home. So we'll hear people naturally use this metaphor of parts so we can work with that. So we identify the pattern of behavior to change. So Paul, in thinking about when it's time to eat or it's time to go out or whatever, and you're thinking about mealtime or lunchtime when you're at work, what is it that you are actually doing which is causing you to your weight to not change and or not go as you'd like it to? What is it you are doing?
Well, it's pretty constant. It just doesn't. I'd like to go down in weight, but it just stays the same.
So what is it that you are doing which is maintaining that?
Eating too much.
Eating too much. So too much tells me there's an amount that's enough. There's an amount that's too much. You know the difference in hindsight. But at the moment that you cross that threshold from that's enough to I'm going to eat the rest of it, in that moment when it goes from being enough to being too much, what are you actually doing in that moment?
Just deciding I'm hungry and I'm going to eat it.
Deciding you're hungry, you're going to eat it. Great. Because what you've all noticed is that too much, eating too much, is a judgment. It's not something that Paul decides to do. He doesn't sit down and say, right, I'm going to eat too much for my lunch today. It's something he can only ever say afterwards. And it could be immediately afterwards. He goes, oh, God, I've eaten too much. Or it could be months afterwards where he gets on the scales or looks in the mirror and thinks, yeah, I've been eating too much. But it doesn't happen at the time he's doing it. So that's not the behavior. Behavior is deciding, so you decide you're hungry, you start eating, you get to the point where in hindsight would have been enough. And then you carry on to the point which is too much. In that kind of second stage, what is it you're actually doing at that point, would you say?
I don't eat too much in one go, though, so I can't eat a lot of food in one go, but I'll eat too many meals.
Okay. So when you are eating a meal, which with hindsight you could have done without, what are you doing?
I feel hungry, so I'm eating something.
Feel hungry, so you're eating something. Okay. So let's stick with that for the pattern of behavior to be changed. And we'll move on to step 2. Step 2 means we've got to dissociate this part that's driving the behavior. And the way that we dissociate it is by pretending that it's like an aspect or a part of Paul which can exist by itself. And we can get it to do that by talking about it as in the third person. We can even give it a name. So what we've got to do is talk to it and say, I want to talk, Paul, to the part of you that's responsible for identifying when you feel hungry and getting you to eat something. And if that part of you had a name, what would its name be, or a job name, or a job title?
Hunger.
Hunger. So I want to talk directly to hunger, because hunger has this important job that it does for you, and we need to find out what that is. So step 3 is working out what is hunger's intention. So we know what it's doing. What we need to find out is, what is the purpose behind what it's doing? Let's assume its intention, its purpose is always useful. It's always aiming to do something useful. But there are times and places when that will be incongruent and therefore will lead to results that are not that desirable for Paul in the long run. So we've got to find out what it's doing. So hunger. What I want to find out from you, hunger, not Paul, talking directly to hunger, is what is it that you're aiming to achieve for Paul? What is it that what's the useful thing that you're doing for Paul by getting him to eat?
Give him some energy.
Some energy. Stop him being hungry.
In the stomach.
So the job of hunger is to stop Paul from being hungry, which sounds a bit circular. But what does that really do for Paul? Because it's more than just keeping Paul fueled. I'm sensing there's something else behind that as well. So what's the other useful thing that you're doing for Paul?
Giving him energy.
Energy for what?
For life.
Energy for life.
Yeah. I get tired a lot.
So it's energy stops Paul getting, because if Paul got tired, then what would happen?
Lose effectiveness, get grumpy.
Okay.
Become inefficient.
Lose effectiveness and grumpy. That's an interesting one. So, so by keeping Paul's energy level up, you keep him what?
Energetic.
So that he can do what?
Get through the day, his job.
Okay. So that's interesting. I'm hearing some other little sort of subplots going on there, which I don't need to worry about because they'll come out later on. So we've got these ways that hunger is keeping Paul energized, keeping Paul in a state of mind and body where he can do the things he needs to do during the day, and that stops him from getting grumpy. It's quite an interesting combination of things going on there. But I'm going to move on to step 4, which is creating alternatives. And for this, I need to talk to a different part of Paul. So Paul, what I need to talk to now is your creative part. And I don't know whether you think of yourself as a creative person, perhaps in a traditional sense, but I guess everybody has different ways of being creative. So what ways would you say that you're creative?
I don't. It's one of those sets of true. I don't think of myself as creative, but tend to come out as creative on personality questionnaires.
Yeah,
they're not creative in that. Probably in.
Probably not. Maybe not artistic or something like that. But.
Lots of ideas.
So coming up with ideas, lots of ideas. So good. So that's exactly what we need your creative part to do. So your creative part that comes up with lots of ideas, does that have a name or a job title that you can give it?
Ideas.
Okay, so ideas. I want to talk directly to ideas now. And ideas, what I want you to do is we've got this problem. We've got hunger, and the job of hunger is to keep Paul energized so that he can get done what he needs to get done, and it stops him from being grumpy. But hunger's so good at doing that that it creates some other unwanted side effects. And there are probably times when hunger can't achieve its objectives by doing that. And so ideas, since you're so good at coming up with ideas, which is perfect, what I want you to do, ideas, is come up with as many different ways as you can that hunger could keep Paul energized and get through the day and not be grumpy. So ideas, what other ideas can you come up with on behalf of hunger that hunger could try out to do different ways of achieving that result?
Lose some weight.
Okay, all right, what else?
Get fitter.
What else?
Drink caffeine.
Okay, excellent. So just an observation to everyone is this is a perfect example of what happens when you first start to get these alternatives. You'll notice the alternatives that are being generated are essentially just versions of the same thing. They're all highly relevant to the way that the problem has been stated. They're still constrained by the rules of the problem, which is you get energy through food and in what you eat, what you consume, losing weight and so on. So they're still following the same sort of dimensions as the problem that's presented. And what I need to push ideas to do is to freely generate ideas that have nothing to do, because remember, hunger is only eating, or is only creating eating as a behavior because that's one way of doing it. And it's a way that works so well, it just carries on doing it. But there are other ways, because the need that is driving the behavior isn't the absence of food in Paul's stomach. It's something else. Energized, grumpy. It's something about that dimension. So ideas. I want you to keep going, as many ideas as you can for other ways that hunger can help Paul to feel energized and not grumpy. And the more ideas and the wilder ideas that you can come up with, the better. So ideas, you just start shouting stuff out. Just whatever comes into your mind, let's hear it.
I'm also struggling to think how else I would.
So what's happening, everybody, is that the problem is creating Paul's reality, and he's stuck in there. So remember, we don't want to get into empathy with the client. We want to break rapport. We want to get them out of rapport with themselves, essentially. One way to do that is, at this point, we don't want to be suggesting alternatives. Well, what about this? Because we're not looking for solutions. What we're looking to do is break the problem. So if you do find your client gets stuck at this point, they're getting stuck in their own little world. And what we can do is shake that out by making a suggestion, but make it a ridiculous one. And it just forces a change in perspective that then can provoke the creative part to start doing its job. So, for example, ideas. Could we get Paul to stick his fingers in an electric socket and electrocute himself? That'll certainly give him some energy. Could we do that? And what else ideas? What other ideas can you come up with for hunger?
If we taped his mouth shut, he wouldn't be able to put anything in it.
Not sure how that would help with being energized, but okay, Paul, ideas? Any ideas as you can, as different as you can, as wild as you can.
So in a way, right, you're not really getting to the crux of the problem. So in a way, The crux of the problem is I have a medical problem of kidney failure, which is causing the tiredness. So normal ideas.
They're not ideas for different, they're not solutions. We're just trying to break the mindset of hunger. Hunger, the name of the part that's creating the behavior that you want to change. So that was good because we got a bit of a diversion, a bit of a distraction, but that's different. So that's good. So ideas, what ideas can you come up with that's going to help Paul feel energized? That's going to help hunger to do its job of helping Paul feel energized. There's not solutions. There's no expectation that these are going to work. In fact, if they just sound ridiculous, that's even better. So
any kind of medicines.
So you're trying to solve the problem. That's counterproductive.
Could you go outside? Get
Again,
fresh air?
it's
That's the
sensible.
problem.
It's a sensible solution to the problem. You're being constrained by the very rules which are constraining Paul. So Paul, ideas. Come on, ideas. You're supposed to be good at coming up with ideas. Let's have as many as we can. Let's have 10. I'm going to count you down. Give me 10 ideas for what hunger could do differently that would help Paul feel energized.
Attach your battery.
Sorry, what was that?
Attach your battery.
Okay, very good.
Skipping.
Play some exciting music.
Okay, very good. Keep going. Whatever comes to mind, just shout it out.
Stick your head out the window.
Good. What else?
Pat yourself in the face.
Good. What else?
Jump up and down.
Good. What else? 5 left.
Dance.
Okay. What else?
Go and talk to someone who's very energetic.
Okay. What else?
Have a cup of tea.
What else?
Good.
Only 2 more, so keep going. Notice how important it is not to fill the space for the client. This isn't about finding solutions. Making suggestions is very unhelpful at this point. So what else?
Go to bed earlier.
Okay, one more.
Eat healthier food.
Okay, you've already mentioned that one, so you've still got one more. The one that's rattling around in your back of the head that you keep saying, no, that's not, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, you got rid of them. Go for a walk around the warehouse.
Okay, good. So that's it. So you notice those ideas came out much more freely than before, and we got that little bit of a distraction in the middle about the kidney thing, which it's good that we got that bit of information we haven't had, but we can't get sidetracked by that because it isn't an answer to the question. The question is come up with ideas, not give us another reason as to why you can't do it. Very important, stick to the process, because at that point, the part that's generating the behavior, hunger, is saying, no, I've got to keep on doing this thing. And so that drive is what threw up that bit of information. So we've got to ignore that. Which brings us to part 5, step 5. So I'll talk to hunger again. Hunger. You're clearly very good at helping Paul stay energized. Would you be willing to accept that there are times when, because of whatever circumstances, you can't do that job as effectively as you'd like, And there are maybe some other consequences that are not so good for Paul, which that creates. And therefore, it might be useful if you had other ways of keeping Paul energized, as well as eating. Would that be fair?
So explain again.
So talking to hunger, you're clearly doing a great job keeping Paul energized. But maybe there are times when that has effects like putting on weight, which are not useful. So would you be willing to accept that you're doing a great job at keeping Paul energized, and there are other ways to do that than just eating? And would you be willing to be responsible for being even better at your job of keeping Paul energized?
I think, yeah, of course I would.
Okay. So what we're going to do is ideas came up with some ideas. You could take any of those ideas. You might even come up with some ideas of your own. And for you to try out. Now, it's very important that you're also getting Paul to eat, because that's necessary. But there's other things that you could be doing as well. For example, to top up his energy levels in between eating. I mean, that would probably be quite a useful thing. So there might be some ideas that you heard from ideas. There might be some ideas that you come up by yourself. But would you be willing to try out some new ideas? Not just like, let's say just for the next 24 hours. And see what happens.
Yeah.
And that takes us on to step 6, which is an ecology check. So this might sound like a strange question, but Paul, are you aware of any other parts within you that object to what we've been talking about and to what we've negotiated? Is there any other part of you that's niggling or saying, oh, but what about this? Or it's not going to work because?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what part is that?
I'm not sure energy is the sole reason.
No, neither am I. So there are other reasons. And there's a part of you. So little observation for everybody. I'm not going to do anything with that, but I'm going to utilize it. So there's a part of you that's aware that energy isn't the sole reason. And I know that. And I mentioned that right at the beginning of this process. And so this part of you that's aware of that, what I want that part to do is keep an eye on things. Make sure that just for the next 24 hours, this other reason, other than energy, is served as well and gets what it needs as well. Would that be reasonable?
Yeah.
Are there any other parts of you that have any objections to what we've talked about?
Yeah, I think I feel like I'm going back to the start of not wanting to do it.
Okay. And that could be absolutely fine. Are you willing? Well, what would be easier than 24 hours? What about 12 hours? What would make it seem like, yeah, I can have a go. I can still do the eating and I can do other things as well, just for a short period of time, just to try it out. There's no long-term commitment.
I think
Because
24
hunger's
hours
in charge.
would be okay.
How long, sorry?
I think 24 hours would be okay.
Okay. And remember, we're not talking about instead of, we're talking about as well as, in addition to. And hunger will figure out what is most effective at keeping the energy level, high. And then this other part will figure out what else needs to be taken care of at the same time. And just the next 24 hours, and then we'll see where we are in 24 hours time. And hunger can then go back to the way things were, or it can incorporate some new ideas. So I guess lunchtime is going to come up in the next couple of hours or so. So talk me through what's happening at lunchtime today as a result of what we've talked about.
I'll have a ham sandwich, and then I want to have something else later on. I'll have lunch and tea as opposed to food at each break.
And thinking about some of the other things that ideas suggested, are you just waiting until you can have your ham sandwich? What other things are you doing that are going to help you to keep your energy levels up in between now and then?
My energy feels all right because I had a decent breakfast today.
So your energy feels all right now? And
Yep.
let's say, 3 or 4 hours from now. Well, 4 hours from now, it'll be just gone 3 o'clock. So we'll be starting to wrap up for the day. So thinking about that point, getting to the end of the call, you close down Zoom and so on. And then you're thinking, what's on your mind?
I want to have a snack instead of, so usually I'll have a snack and then a snack later at the hospital. So
right. And what are some of the things that help you to keep your energy level high that you can be doing in addition to that?
To be honest, I don't need a high energy levels because I've not got, once this course ends, I've not got anything to have a high energy level for.
High enough to do the things that you need to do. The things that you choose to do.
To be honest.
Sorry?
The things I need to do, I'll be able to do without having more energy. I'll have enough energy to do the things I need to do.
And some of the things that ideas came up with, like talking to somebody or walk, fresh air, just moving around, I guess. So what are the sort of things that might be happening that give you that energy you hadn't even noticed were happening?
Take the dog for a walk at tea time.
So that's a regular thing that you do, I guess.
It's a regular thing I should do. The kids instead.
Okay.
I did pay a
Yes,
dog
they
walk.
keep you active.
They give up. They're retired.
All right. Okay. So there's our future pacing. And you notice there were examples there where some of the obstacles started to come up in the future pacing. So again, just all I did was remind Paul that actually he's probably used some of the things that ideas suggested without even realizing it. If moving around creates energy, then logically just standing up when he leaves the room, will just walk into the kitchen will create energy. So it's about reframing the things that he's already doing. Taking the dog for the walk isn't about taking the dog because the dog needs a walk. It's also an opportunity to create energy. So it's helping him to reframe some of the things that are happening anyway. And so exactly the sort of things that we talked about earlier, hearing Paul talk in present tense, hearing him stay in present tense, listening out for any signs of dissociation, and noticing things that he's talking about that are relevant to trying out a change in behavior, but also things that he's talking about that he hadn't noticed would be helpful, and utilizing those, bringing those in. So that whole thing is the 6-step reframe. And as you can see, that was about 35 minutes or so, including me taking time to explain stuff to you. So comfortably half an hour, I would say. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break now. When we come back from our break, I'm going to pop you into pairs, and we're going to do a 6-step reframe both ways. So it'll take you a while. I mean, it's going to take you for, most of the chunk that's going to take us up to the next break. And remember the bits to really focus on. Step 1, identifying the behavior to change. My tip is find what they first tell you about won't be the behavior, it will be the symptom. It'll be the effect of the behavior. So try and figure out what is it that they are doing. And the other thing is that people will do when you're asking them about the behavior to change is they'll talk about the problem in a way that makes it sound like it's a bad thing that they've got to change, that's something they don't like. And they'll start putting a judgment on the behavior. I remember one of the things in the Six Step Reframe is we're finding the positive intention. We're saying this behavior is useful. You know, it's serving you well. It's doing good things for you. But sometimes it overacts. Sometimes it goes too far. Sometimes it acts in the wrong time and place. That's when we notice the problem. You know, so hunger, eating, good, but it goes too far sometimes. Sometimes it does eating when it could do other things that don't involve calories and still have the same result. So that's really what we're aiming to do with the six-step reframe, is we take that positive intention that's driving the behavior and not change the intention, because the intention is valuable. We're just diverting that energy into alternatives. And we get the creative part to come up with the alternatives, because as Einstein said, the part that created the problem can't solve the problem. Because what that part did, what hunger did, was create the rules that say, this is how you have to do these certain things. So when we're creating the alternatives, what you're hearing, as we heard with Paul, we're hearing solutions that are really just a rehash of the current behavior. And we're getting 2 or 3 and then stop. And so that is the little sort of resistance that we've got to push them through. And we can push them through that by just keeping the pressure on them to come up with ideas, picking a number and getting, you know, and count, right, I want you to give me 20 or 10 or whatever, and just keep the pressure up on them to come up with ideas. If you have to make a suggestion, make it a ridiculous one, because all you're trying to do is get them into a free-flowing, just coming up with ideas, anything, you know. So to take them from, I could do this or this, stop, into I could do this or this or this or that. Once you get into that free flow of ideas, they'll just come tumbling out. We didn't quite with Paul get to the level of him then. I could look at the color yellow. I could smell a flower. I could sing a song. I could notice the texture of the carpet. I could look out the window. I could, you know, but it's ideas coming out at that sort of pace. That's what you're looking for. Because they're no longer evaluating those and judging those ideas and saying, well, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. Now they're just focusing on generating ideas. And then when we get to the end, we do the ecology check. And if any other parts come up, don't need to really do anything with it. Any objections, any incongruence comes up, just utilize it. So, okay, that's a very important job. Would you be, you know, willing to keep an eye on that as well for the next 24 hours. Make sure everything goes according to plan. Make sure you don't lose out on something else. You don't miss something else that's important, and so on. And all we're doing is just looking for that point of consensus. We're looking for the yes, willing to take responsibility, willing to give it a try just for the next week, the next 24 hours, the next minute. It doesn't matter. Because that's about expectation of the end point. What we have to do is reduce the barrier, the resistance, to the point where I'm prepared to just start. And, you know, as you can imagine, any big changes that we make in life, we don't achieve those things by making big changes. We achieve those things by making very small changes and just starting. And in fact, if any of you watch diet programs on British TV, there's a guy called Michael Mosley who does a lot of these things. He's got a radio program now. I heard it yesterday. It's called Just One Thing. And it's just a little short segment on Radio 4 where he talks about just one thing that you can do that's easy to do, that's easy to change. And if you start doing that, it will add up to a big difference over time. So that's all we're looking for with the six-step reframe. We're not looking for a big action plan. We're looking for just something that you can start doing differently for a period of time. So if it doesn't work out, no harm done, just to make it easy to start. And of course, what we're really hoping for is, having started, they will carry on, because actually the fundamental root cause of the problem is not the behavior, it's the lack of choice. That's always the case with every problem. The problem is not the problem. The problem is always lack of choice. Only having one way to do something. So lack of flexibility is, because what will happen is the world will always present you with a situation where the thing that you know how to do doesn't work anymore. If at that point you can adapt, you'll continue to be successful. If you can't adapt, you'll get stuck, and then the pattern of behavior will then start to create unwanted side effects. And then the side effects become the problem. So, with all of these things that we're going to work on with the 6-step reframe, smoking, for example, smoking isn't a problem. It's lung disease that's a problem. But by the time you have lung disease, the only way to cure that is through, pretty horrible, invasive means. Better to solve it before it happens. The paradox being, the person who's smoking will think, well, one more isn't going to kill me. And they are absolutely right. The person who's trying to lose weight will think, well, one bit of chocolate isn't going to make me put on weight, and they are right. But it's the set of rules that create that as being the only behavior, the only way I can have energy is to eat. Clearly, that's going to be counterproductive, because there are going to be times when you need energy and you can't eat because of the situation that you're in, and so on. So it's the limiting nature that creates the problem, not the behavior itself. So it's time for a break. So we're going to come back in 30 minutes. And then once we've come back and everyone's back here, I'll pop you into breakout rooms, and I'll drop in on you and check that everything's going okay. But I'll leave you to it. And as I say, this is pretty much a whole coaching session in itself. So it's a good opportunity to practice all of the other things that you've been learning as well. Practice bringing them into the conversation gently. Practice leading them out of it gently. Don't just launch straight into the technique when you get into the breakout room. Think about well-formed outcomes. When they tell you what it is that they want to work on at the beginning, think, is that well-formed? Is it positive? If they're saying, I don't like this, or I don't want this to happen anymore, well, what is it you do want? And so on. So think about incorporating all of the things that we've talked about, because this is an opportunity to practice a complete coaching session. So if you've got any questions when we come back after the break, then we can have a few minutes to make sure you're all clear on the exercise. So I'll see you all again in half an hour. So yeah, good stuff. I heard identifying the right behaviors, putting some pressure on to create those, get the creative alternatives going, future pacing and getting them into the present tense and talking about that, noticing the objections and the incongruence. So I heard lots of very good stuff going on during that exercise. So how did that work out from your point of view?
Actually thought it was pretty positive at the end. Sorry, Paul.
Go on.
Just because it kind of did help me to reframe, and it also made me think about things as to why certain things are, which I've never thought about before.
Yes, good. Paul?
Yeah, I think it was definitely aided having two people practice on me first and see where it had gone wrong. So practice definitely helps with it, and I think we kind of learned focusing around point 2. Definitely, sort of, if you move on too quickly from there, it gets harder as you go through.
Yes. Yeah. Very good. What else?
The other thing as well, it was sort of easier to, as it says in the book, focus on step 2 on a purpose as opposed to a reward.
Mm-hmm.
Not always a reward per se. I'm trying to look specifically for a reward rather than a purpose, which is a reward in itself. Which sorry, putting too many positive connotations on why you're doing it.
Yeah. And the reward can be, it comes afterwards, after the event, of course, and it can be a judgment, it can be subjective, it can be outside of your control. But the intention behind it is always, and remember, positive doesn't mean good. Positive just means to get something. So yeah, very good. What else did any of you find?
Well, I think for us also, Nasir and myself, it was quite a good session. Nasir quite was positive. I did not quite pass the ecology test. First of all, I didn't have a problem. Then we created a problem out of not having a problem. And then there was a slight problem in the ecology test, but yeah, we've tried to figure that out and see that, let's see some positive outcomes to come. So it was a good exercise. May not be 100%, as you had done with Paul, but yeah, we will, I guess, reach there in a bit.
Well, from what I heard when I dropped in, you were doing fine. So certainly following the broad process, which is the important thing.
Yeah, somewhere for me, I was finding it a bit difficult to kind of understand what the real behavior is, in terms of the right words and all of that. So yes, there was a bit struggle, but I guess it will come over a period of time.
Yeah, that rightly pointed out. Initially, whatever point she was mentioning, whatever conveying, it was symptoms more than the behavior as such. But it is good clues you have already given in the book and as well as while you talked. So it was very clear that most of the things she was mentioning the symptoms. But I'm happy that I could help her in finding out the real behavior issue what she's facing. Than symptoms. And that way, I feel so happy. And that stage is really challenging. Finding out the real behavior problem, or behavior issue, what we want to change, and then other stages. And from the portion, I think 4th or 5th stage onwards, when we are expected to give the creative ideas, from there onwards, a kind of more of positivity or a kind of feel good thing is coming out. And I really enjoyed it in that.
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of things happening within this technique. All the others that we've done so far, they're really all just designed to do one thing. So we recognize from the client's language, from the way that they're describing their situation, we recognize something which fits the structure of a particular technique. If they've got a decision that they've separated into 2 parts and they can't have one without the other, then we put them back together again with the squash. And if there's something like a reaction, an instant reaction to something that they're not in control of, we use a swish. So with all of the other techniques, it's very simple how the technique is designed to do one thing. And therefore, within a coaching session with somebody, you would use many different techniques depending on how that conversation is evolving and moving along. The 6-step reframe is all of that's being done within the whole thing for you. So as I said earlier, it really is more like a script for an entire coaching session. So if we look through the 6-step reframe step by step, what was step 1? What are you doing in step 1?
Step 1 is identifying a behavior or the problem, that we are looking to solve.
So that's really interesting. Straight away, the behavior or the problem, because what they will describe to us is the problem. And what we've got to find out is, what are they actually doing? So if all we did with somebody, because of limited time, if all we did was step 1, how would that be useful? I can see your lips moving, Paul.
You're at least raising awareness.
Good. And getting them focused on the right thing, because if they're focused on the symptoms, by the time they're aware of the symptoms, it's too late to change their behavior. The behavior has already created those symptoms. So we're getting them to focus on, yes, exactly what it is that they're doing. And then what else is useful about that?
You're finding the conflicting behaviours. So you're working out that they're making.
Yeah. So think in terms of the well-formed outcomes criteria, the pure criteria. What's the other useful thing that we're doing when we're focusing on the behavior rather than the results?
You're taking it back into their control.
It's under their control. Very good. Yes. So if all we do with somebody is step 1, that's very useful, because we've got them to focus on what it is that they are doing that creates the problem. That is instantly under their control. It's framed in the positive, so they can see actually what they thought of as was a problem is actually just a side effect or a consequence of something else that they're trying to do. That's a very useful, very valuable insight. What was step 2?
Disassociation.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask, I established communication with the part generating the behavior. I was going to ask them, what does that achieve? And Paul's answered the second question, which is dissociation. So if we're dissociating, if we're now taking that behavior and we're condensing it down into this metaphorical part of you, which is responsible for that, and we're dissociating that, what is the value? If that was all we did, what would be the value of that?
You've removed it from them to give them a chance to look at it.
Yes. And what might that achieve?
Awareness about actual problem, what the client is facing.
Yeah.
It allows them to take the emotion out of it a little bit, because they've been able to push it away.
Right. We know that as soon as we dissociate, we'll diminish the emotional intensity. So it's taking the emotion out of it. It's allowing them to look at it just like we did with perceptual positions, to maybe look at it impartially. One of the things that you could do at that point, if you wanted to, is you could get them to change seats. You could give them a way to physically dissociate from that part. So, you know, the demo I did with Paul, I could have gotten Paul to move his chair and said, you know, so now you're in the position of hunger looking at Paul and you're doing something really useful for him. So anything that we can do to help them to dissociate at that point, and giving it a name helps us to call it a name that's distinct from the person we're talking to. That helps them to dissociate it. So yeah, absolutely right. The dissociating reduces the emotional intensity, allows them to reflect on, to look at that behavior more impartially. Very good. What was step 3?
Separating the intention from the behavior.
Right. So this was when we asked that part, having dissociated it, what its intention is. So if that was all we did, what would be the usefulness of that?
This is an understanding of why you might be doing something.
Yes. And what else? What's important about that?
To focus on.
It's the why, isn't it?
Yes. There's something particularly important about that why.
If you know intent, you're explaining the behavior.
You can fix the behavior.
Well, there's a couple of things in that. Knowing the intent, knowing why. The focus on the word positive.
That around judgment again.
Yes.
And the judgment we place upon that sort of bad thing that we're doing.
Yes, because the judgment will get in the way. The judgment will cause them to resist change because they'll become defensive about that. You know, you can imagine a teacher, why are you doing that bad thing? Well, because I'm an idiot, obviously. So understanding the positive intention is taking away the judgment. That we're saying it's, you know, the result that this behavior gets is sometimes counterproductive or sometimes unintentional. But the intention is always to achieve something, towards achieve something useful. If we can find out what that is, we're already starting to reframe that behavior as being useful. And remember, one of the presuppositions of NLP that we talked about was every behavior is motivated by a positive intention and has a context in which it has value. So there's an intention to get something useful and a time and a place when that happens. And then by implication, there's also a time and a place when we don't get something that's useful. But if what happens is we hang on to the judgment that this is a bad thing or this is a problem, then that will tend to create resistance. So if all we do is reframe their problem as a behavior, as something that they are doing, and they're doing that in pursuit of something that's useful to them, then how is that valuable? If that's all that we do with them, how is that valuable?
Does that gets us in a space where we are willing to find out ways to work on that particular problem?
Right. Right. So if we reframe it as something useful, then okay, well, maybe I might be interested in finding other ways to do it then. Whereas if we label it as bad and this is a bad thing that you do and we've got to stop it or fix it, then we're creating resistance. So yeah, we're overcoming that resistance to change. Very good. And what was step 4?
Creating alternatives.
Tricky one, this, because there's actually 2 steps within step 4. We're kind of borrowing, we're kind of building on the fact that we've already done this once before within the 6-step reframe. So we're not bothering to mark it out as a separate step, but it's really 2 steps in one. So what was the first part of creating alternative step 4?
That was about creating an acceptance in the person that they could be creative and think outside the box.
Right, right. Yes. So we're starting to identify this creative capability. That's the first part of it. And then what's the second part?
For them to see that there is a solution.
Not so much to see that there is a solution. I suppose, yes, in generally, yes, to see that there is a solution, but to not be attached to what that solution might be.
That there's a choice.
Yeah. Yeah, there is more choice. Yeah. Because remember, the fundamental problem is not whatever the problem they're presenting you with. The fundamental problem is always lack of choice. That if you take any behavior, doesn't matter how wonderful and amazing it is, and we make that the only choice that you've got, it will create problems. So lack of choice is always the fundamental problem that we're working with. So yes, step 4 is 2 steps in one. First, we're doing the dissociation that we did with the part generating the behavior. So we're doing a dissociation, we're naming it, we're objectifying it. That's the first part. We don't make it an explicit step because we've already done it once before. So the client now knows what we're asking them to do when we do that. So that's the first bit. And then the second part is now that we've dissociated that, getting it to generate alternatives. And what's very important is we're not asking it to come up with solutions, because a solution would be attached to the original outcome. And we don't want to be attached or constrained in that way. We just want to come up with anything at all. Because the value of doing that, the value of coming up with any ideas at all is what?
It's demonstrating that they can get themselves unstuck almost and getting that ball rolling.
Yeah. 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 And what else?
Think outside the box.
Mm-hmm. The box being what?
The problem and the solutions you've already been through.
Yes. Because as everyone will tell you, they've tried everything and nothing works.
Yeah, if they knew what would work, they'd have already solved it, wouldn't they?
Exactly right. They wouldn't be talking to you about it. So it isn't their lack of creativity that's the problem. It's the constraint that creates the problem. Will continue. Will cause that problem to persist. Will stop them from thinking of anything different. And so the whole point of creating the alternatives is not to come up with viable ideas. Is to demonstrate that the rules that created the problem can be broken.
Is it also giving a chance for us to think the problem from a different perspective, or one more opportunity to do an introspection where it is going wrong, or what is the real reason behind our behavior?
Yeah, definitely, because in order to freely create alternatives, you have to first reframe and think about the problem from a different perspective. So I think I heard one with Christy. Who were you working with? Was it Becky? And I think Becky was, as everyone will be, stuck at the point of creating alternatives. And you suggested something like you go outside and jump up and down on a trampoline. So it's nice because it isn't a solution. It isn't a genuine viable, well, you should do this. You should try this. It's not a serious suggestion, but it's a provocation that and if their response is, well, I can't do that, then it frees them up into, oh, but I could do X and Y and Z. So it starts to get that creative process moving. And again, what you could do if you wanted to is get them to sit in a different chair. Think about what we were working on last time with the Milton model statements. What might we call the chair to ask them to move to?
The ideas chair.
Okay,
Yeah,
takes it the ideas chair, right? Very good. So anything that we can do to get them to dissociate, because as I said earlier, to paraphrase Einstein, we can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. And I think a lot of people take that as a message that you should change your state of mind in order to solve the problem. I would say it a little bit differently. I would say the thinking itself is the problem. Because if you think of any problem that you have in life, it isn't right here now in front of you. It's a collection of ideas, a collection of ways that you represent relationships in your mind. And you represent relationships in such a way as to create barriers. So you'll think, well, I want this, but I can't have it until I've done this. And I can't have that because I don't have this. And then I mean, you're back to square one again. You go around in circles. And, you know, we could say that none of those restrictions are true. They don't exist in the physical world. They only exist in the way that you're representing that in your head. But the effect of that is it's causing you to not take some action in the real world. And that's then you manifest that problem in reality. Because, for example, you don't even apply for a job because you've told yourself, well, I can't apply for a job until I've got this qualification, but I can't get the qualification until I've done this thing that I need the experience, and I can't get the experience until I've done the job. And then you go around in circles and then you get yourself stuck. But none of those are true. But they will have a basis in truth. They'll be based on some life experience that you've got or what somebody's told you, some expectation that you formed. So you get yourself tied up in knots as a way that we represent these relationships. It doesn't exist in the physical world. So that creating alternatives, dissociating the creative part, getting it to come up with alternatives is only about breaking the problem, just about breaking the rules that created the problem. We're not trying to come up with any sort of viable, realistic things that, you know, suggestions for what they're going to do. What is step 5?
The willingness to accept that they could do something different.
Right. What's important about that step? What does that give us?
Power over the problem.
Right.
They become unstuck.
Yeah. So the ability to solve it now becomes their responsibility, therefore under their control. So if all we did was get them to generate a load of crazy ideas for what they could do differently, what would be the value of that?
Actually, the solution becomes more possible because you know, out of those loads of ideas, there would be some things which really appeals and which are doable, and which brings in a positive mood and the positive frame of mind.
Right. So they can reframe and get them into a different frame of mind, a more positive frame of mind. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. And what else? If all we did was get them to come up with some crazy ideas, what would the value of that be?
You can see whether they've moved on, because I'm trying to remember how you said it, that there are some of their suggestions will be still grounded within the problem.
Right. Yes.
And will show that they haven't moved on as much as if they're able to be a lot more creative and their ideas are more free flowing.
Right. Right. So that's the way, that's where they break the rules of the problem. They step out of the box, to use Paul's terminology. So, and what's the value of getting them just to do that?
It's what we've just said, isn't it? You can't solve the problem with the mind that created it.
There's still work to be done as well, isn't there? So you could, I don't know, use some, can you pull in other techniques to try and reframe again and before moving forward again? Because in a way, it's almost like a mini ecology check, isn't it? Before you move on to step 6.
Very good. Yes, it is. Yeah. And yes, you're right, because as well, because there's something interesting there about time. You know, we've done this technique, just run through the whole thing. It's taken you about half an hour or so.
Oh yeah.
But no reason why it needs to.
All right. Have you got the AstraZeneca in this?
It could mean that, you know, you could do this whole technique over a number of sessions with the client. We call it 6 steps, you know, within half an hour. We could call it 6 conversations, 6 separate conversations. And the one where you're creating alternatives, yes, you could do all kinds of creativity tools that you could use with them at that point. Opens up some interesting possibilities for when you're doing organizational problem solving with groups of people. So if all we did was get them to come up with some crazy ideas and then get them to take responsibility or accept responsibility for change, what have we achieved just by doing that?
The kind of reinforcement of whatever discussed, and to make them understand what they realized.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. What did we achieve just by getting them to take responsibility for change?
It goes back to the well-formed outcomes again, that they are in control of it and not others.
Right. So we're actually sneaking in a well-formed outcome, aren't we? At that point, because they've thought about what it is that they want to achieve. We're getting them to take responsibility, therefore under their control. We've snuck in a well-formed outcomes without them noticing. And then what's step 6?
The
Future pacing. Future pacing.
There's the ecology check first, isn't it? Are there any other parts that have an objection? So we're still playing on this metaphor that the person is made up of parts, which is helping us to dissociate them. And yes, we're doing an ecology check. So who found that when you were asked that question, that you did get a little something, an objection, something that didn't quite fit, a little concern came up? Who found that happened? And how did you experience that?
I did with Becky, because she said that she would get on a Friday night, she would go out for a bike ride, and then she went, as long as it's not raining.
So Becky, how did you experience that objection? Did it just come straight away as a, you know, as that statement, or was it a picture, or was it a feeling, or how did that come to mind?
No, I felt quite positive about, yeah, that's a good idea. I could go on the bike ride. And then I looked outside and thought, don't fancy if it's raining. But we did then come up with an alternative solution.
Yeah.
Good. Who else? And if you had an objection, how did you become aware of that objection? What did you actually notice?
For me too, it was a visual.
Very good.
A little bit of stuttering, a rambling, and a
Okay, very good.
And Christy, when we were doing it the other way around, she lapsed back into generalizations without sort of specifically remaining in the moment, and it sort of pinpointing in behaviors. I had to work a lot harder in that section to get her to actually talk about the things that she is doing to make it different.
Good, well spotted. So yeah, we're going to hear these objections are going to come up in a number of different ways. They might go with the flow of the 6-step reframe and say, there's a part of me that is worried about X. Or the objection might come out in a way that seems to be trying to derail the process, that you know, oh, well, I can't do that because of whatever reason. And, you know, it may seem very logical and plausible, and you think, oh, I must have made a mistake or something. But so these objections can pop up in all kinds of different ways. And what you're doing is you're bringing that into the process. You're saying, as would be good practice in any sort of conflict resolution scenario, like in a meeting at work, somebody raises an objection, rather say, yeah, I'll forget about that. That's irrelevant. Don't worry about that. Because that doesn't make the objection go away. So what we're doing is we're utilizing it. We're saying, thank you, that's a valid concern. Now let's figure out how to build that into the negotiation. Because I'm sure you've all been in meetings at work where that's happened. Or is it more likely you've been at meetings at work where somebody's raised an objection to a plan and it's been dismissed? Well, yeah, don't have to worry about that. Yes, that's not well, that's fine. You're just being negative. Isn't that more likely the way that we deal with those sorts of things?
Or as everyone says in our business, we'll park that.
We'll park.
Park. We'll catch up later.
Yeah.
Move on.
Yeah. Let's hope you don't park your car the same way, because I never find it. Yes.
Oh, sorry, take it offline.
Yes. Yeah. So often what happens is people become so fixated on, right, we got an agreement, we got a result, let's just race to the end of the meeting, let's get out of here, that things come up as an objection and it gets dismissed, it gets diminished, devalued, and it doesn't help, because if that's a legitimate risk that somebody's noticed that just gets trampled on, it's just going to come back later on and bite you. So it doesn't help. And certainly it's an example of what the person will experience in real life anyway. You know, they'll be reaching for the cake and the little voice will be saying, I shouldn't really, oh, shut up, it'll be fine. You know, so by attending to that, by creating the space for that objection to be heard, because it's a legitimate risk that's been raised, we increase the chances that change of behavior is going to be sustainable. If all that we did and nothing else, if all that we did with somebody was allow them to hear that internal conflict and respect it, what would that achieve?
It's raising the awareness again, isn't it? It's allowing them to see that that's there, rather than them just having a problem. That they're able to almost see. I don't know how to put it into words, what I'm trying to say.
If you had a plan in mind for something and you had a lot of doubts, and you talked to somebody who just listened to all of those doubts and kind of helped you to express them and understand that they were all very valid concerns, how would that be useful for you?
Would it be useful if they're kind of acknowledging that they're valid concerns? Does that not just reinforce the fact that perhaps you shouldn't be doing whatever it is?
Well, I think, as I might have said before, every decision that we make is a compromise. Every decision has a cost. if we don't think about the cost until afterwards, then that we get a very different outcome to if we consider the cost beforehand and accept that as it is. Like with kids, you know, we were talking earlier about having children. People don't find out all the reality of having kids until after they've got one, and then it's too late to send it back. Versus if you knew all of that beforehand, and people would say, you know, if I knew then what I know now, and if I'm guessing here, but when you hear people say, if I knew what it was going to be like having kids before we had them, if you were to say to them, so what, would that mean that you would not have had kids? I'm guessing most people would say, I would still have kids, but I would be better prepared. Would that be a fair guess? So it's about going into a complex decision, forewarned, feeling informed, feeling like you're more aware. You see, because if what we do is deny that there are going to be problems, we can be pretty certain that we're going to crash into those problems pretty painfully. If we're aware that they are potential risk, and there's a part of you that is expressing that risk as an objection, then we can deal with it now. And that could mean just acknowledging it. It could mean renegotiating to incorporate that. It could mean putting in place some very practical measures to offset that risk. But the point is, we'll have considered it rather than just launching blindly into something and hoping for the best. And I think often, you know, in a workplace context, yeah, people are afraid of, as they would put it, often I've heard it, opening a can of worms and talking about all the drawbacks and the problems of a plan for fear that it's going to stop it. It's going to cause it to stop. And actually, by not talking that through at the beginning, it's more likely that those problems will actually come up in real life and then stop the project. You know, and I'm sure you've seen this at work around things like contracts and so on, where people anticipate there's going to be a problem, but keep it to themselves and hope for the best. And then when it does become a problem, it's a much bigger problem than if they'd actually been honest about it in the first place. You know, they'll think, oh, well, we won't say anything and hopefully they won't notice. And they do notice. And then not only is that the problem, but also why didn't you tell them about it becomes an even bigger problem. Anyone, does that sound familiar to anyone? Like in manufacturing, you know, this thing's got a problem, a fault or whatever, doesn't do what the customer wanted. Oh, they won't notice. Yeah, if you've noticed, they will notice. Yeah. So what's then the value of getting them just to, so we've got the taking responsibility for change, we've got the objections coming up. So just that value of being heard, of having those objections heard. You know, if you're in a meeting at work and you're the person with the objection, you're the person who spotted something that other people have missed or certainly not talked about, and you raise that, what's the value that you are adding when you raise that point?
Help probably create a plan for its mitigation.
Exactly. We create a plan to mitigate it. And how does it feel when you're told that you're being negative, or to park it, or that's irrelevant, or it's not going to be a problem, it'll be fine?
Just a polite way to shut up, isn't it?
Dismissive.
Sorry, Paul, what did you say then?
Just a polite way of someone saying shut up, isn't it?
And how does it feel to hear that?
Yeah, sod you then.
Right, well, exactly. So you withdraw your observation. You say, well, you want to get yourself into a mess, you go ahead. And Arpita, sorry, what did you say then? To how does that feel to have that shut down?
Uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's been socially rejected. It's a horrible feeling. Yeah. And what it does is it makes people withdraw their effort. So think back to day one of the course when we were talking about submodalities. And one of the things we talked a little bit about was that was the voice quality, the voice tone and you were remembering memories, and there was voice tone and voice qualities that went along with those. And the voice inside your head has, which we call internal dialogue. So the voice inside your head has a voice tone, it has qualities, it talks to you in certain ways, calls you an idiot and points out mistakes that you've made, and which is terribly helpful. And when you think, if you imagine, if we take this metaphor of parts that we're using with the 6-step reframe, and you imagine inside of your head is a little committee, and each person in the committee has a different job, and somebody on that committee's job is to spot potential problems, and you ignore them, what happens to that person's voice, that imaginary person's voice in your head? If you keep saying to it, shut up, you're just being negative.
Does it stop?
Eventually, and then you're in real trouble. But before it stops, it starts to become maybe more whiny, more nagging.
Crosser.
Sorry, Becky?
Gets crosser because no one's listening.
Right, exactly. So your self-criticism gets more unpleasant the less you listen to it. Because actually the self-criticism didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of some useful observation that you made. But then because you don't want to hear it, you try and suppress it. It gets crosser or more nagging or more whiny until one day it gives up and then you don't hear it at all. And that's, like I say, that's when you're in real trouble. So when we've got people who don't say, here's a problem that could happen, and we don't listen to it. So yeah, we resolve that. We in the ecology check, and that leads us into future pacing, and we know what future pacing is all about. It gives us a chance to check the effectiveness of what we've done. So if you take all of that, there's a huge amount going on within the 6-step reframe. Any one step in itself is tremendously useful. But when we put them all together in that sequence, the effect that we're leading somebody through is recognizing their problem as being a useful behavior that's just happening out of context, and being able to detach emotionally from that, and being able to see that actually there are different things that they could do. They actually have infinite choice about other things that they could do. Their choice is limitless. And having done that and committed to, they're going to just do something differently without being attached to solving the problem. They're just going to do something, anything differently, and just see what happens. When they start to do something differently, what effect does that have on the other people who will inevitably be involved in that situation?
Well, they may acknowledge and actually give support to the person.
Yes, that's certainly true. That certainly can be the case.
That's an example. A lot of times people have negative thoughts but don't bring them forward themselves.
Yes, very good. So if any situation involving other people, you just do something different than you normally do, something different than they're expecting you to. As a minimum, what will happen?
They will recognize that. Maybe react differently to you.
Yes. If you change how you behave with them, they have to change what they do in response, even if they haven't noticed you doing anything different. And so just getting the person just to do one small thing differently will change then the dynamic of a relationship, and that changes then how other people respond, which then changes how they feel and how they respond, and so on. And then the thing goes off in a different direction than it would have done before. And so what they'll have to do is compare that experience to what would have happened. What do I think would have happened based on my past experience? Because we can never know for certain that the same thing would happen again. But Paul, we took a longer break before we got on to reflecting about the 6-step reframe. I'm interested to know if any thoughts crossed your mind about what you were doing to keep your energy level up.
My energy level's all right. So I went to have my ham sandwich, and I thought, I don't fancy ham sandwich, but and then I fancied a tin of curry I'd got. I checked, and it was the same calories as my ham sandwich I was going to have.
Would you normally have checked?
No.
So that's interesting. So that's not something that Paul's creative part came up with as an idea, but it's something that Paul spontaneously did, because now, as he said earlier, he's aware, he's thinking about what he's doing, what's driving him, what's motivating him. He's aware of his energy level. All of these things are useful. All of these things change the balance of what happens. And all of that adds up over time. Those little small differences add up over time. And then if we just think about wrapping the 6-step reframe in an opening and a closing, that rather than just doing the abrupt, here's the technique, start, stop. How did you get on with that? So who had a go at doing that, sort of leading your client a little bit more gracefully into the technique, bringing them back out of it at the end? Who gave some thought to that?
Tried the intro.
Good. And what did you notice from doing that?
I got it wrong. I said sunshine through your window, and she said it's pissing it down. so skipping too far ahead and assuming things.
So that's good feedback anyway about an assumption that you'd made. But even just mentioning the word sunshine, it's a nice word to use. The fact that you're taking time to even do that rather than just launching straight into the technique, what is the effect of that, or what was the effect of that lead into it? So you're working with Christelle, yeah?
Yeah.
So Christelle, what was the effect for you of, rather than just Paul saying, right, what's the problem you want to work on? What was the effect of him leading you into that?
I think the opening was quite brief, if I recall, Paul. It was something to do with sitting in a comfortable. Was it a comfortable chair? I'm not sure if that was what you actually used, but
that with the sunshine shining through your window.
And if we're picky about it, the sunshine is coming through your window.
It is now.
It's just coming through your window via some clouds and rain.
But it sort of helped me get into that mindset, I think. So rather than getting straight into it, where I would have probably felt a bit unprepared,
yeah,
it sort of helped me get into that mindset.
Very good. Very good. So rather than just right, what's your problem to work on? And I'm just going to do a technique on you. It's thinking, okay, just going to both of us take a minute just to settle into this. So that's a really important thing to think about when we're having these sorts of conversations with people.
I think that the thing is as well that they definitely will get better as you practice them, because at first they're a little contrived and you get used to sort of breaking that ice, and people getting used to the way you speak a little bit more rather than, oh, Paul's acting weird.
Yeah. To the extent that Paul acting weird suddenly becomes extremely normal. Exactly. And that's an interesting point, that that is an example of just changing the expectations, changing the dynamic of the relationship, and then they have to change something.
It's like my general manager the other day did a terrible one where we were having a bit of a tough morning meeting, as Christy will remember. And we had a senior leadership team meeting afterwards. And he said, right, we need to get some cakes and we can raise the atmosphere of the meeting later.
Of the what meeting?
Of the we had to get some cakes to cheer people up for the meeting later.
Right.
So he's already saying the meeting later was going to be just as bad.
Oh dear. Yeah, so setting a good expectation there.
But thought he was doing a good thing by setting us up for a bad meeting.
Right.
You should use him as a case study.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's like,
So I did observed an assessment session with a practitioner student last week, I think, or the week before. And so we got on the Zoom call, and then I said, okay, so it's, you know, half an hour for you, and I'll turn my video off. So I turned off my camera and my microphone, and straight away she said, okay, so sit down in a comfortable chair and see you sitting. So just put your hands on your lap, close your eyes, and as you can hear this, and I thought, what's she doing? She's going straight into a hypnosis-y trance induction thing. There was no setup. There was no, what's she doing? And she did that for a couple of minutes, and then she stopped, and they said, okay, so now you're comfortable and you're relaxing, your right frame of mind. Tell me what it is that's brought you here, or something along those lines. And actually I thought, that was actually really good because she took control right from the start and just went straight into very directly creating that. So, oh, right, okay, she's in charge. Okay, she knows what she's doing. Off we go. And there was no messing about. It was straight into it. But it was such an interesting setup. But the effect is the same. The thing is, you're not just getting straight into, right, what are we working on? What's the problem? Come on, I've only got half an hour. Let's get on with it. You're doing something that isn't just about getting the client into the most useful or resourceful frame of mind for the conversation you're going to have, but also yourself as well. You know, while you're asking the other person to sit into a comfortable chair, it's not only them that's getting comfortable, it's having an effect on you as well. So if you think back to the first day, and we talked about some modalities and thinking about voice tone and internal criticism, did we do anything on that day? Or did we do anything, certainly in the first module, on getting into a conversation with your internal dialogue? Did we talk about that at all?
Don't remember it.
No, I don't think we did. So, and it's interesting because it's relevant because of what we've been talking about with the congruence, the objections in the six-step reframe, that you're getting this internal conflict that you're bringing it up to the surface, and then you can deal with it and do something practical or useful with it. And I find the six-step reframe, because it's working with this metaphor of parts, that a person is made up of different parts. It's just like any organization. And I find we can take the six-step reframe and we can use it as an organizational problem-solving tool. If we think about the principles of each step. So rather than people talking about this is what's wrong, this is what we don't like, this is rubbish, that's rubbish. What is actually happening? What are people doing? And what's causing them to do that? And then how do we separate that out and put it to one side for the moment? And then how do we work on generating alternatives, which back in the 90s, you know, the heyday of corporate restructuring and so on, we used to have brainstorming workshops where people would go on training courses just to learn how to come up with crazy ideas. The idea being that if we separate out the suggestions from the problem, then the suggestions won't be attached to trying to solve this particular problem. They might actually just be interesting suggestions in themselves. And I remember a guy I was coaching back in, would have been about the mid 2000s, I think. He was a production engineer in a company that made mechanical stuff, hydraulics, that sort of thing. And what would happen is they would have some production problem and it would bring the whole production line to a halt. And then they get everybody around a table and they would kind of try and figure out what the cause of the problem was in order to get the production line back up and running as quickly as possible. So they pretty quickly identify what the problem was, but then they'd have to try and come up with some way of solving the problem. And so this guy, somebody would say, well, what if we did this? And he would immediately say, no, that won't work because. And then somebody else will say, well, what if we do that? And he'll say, no, that won't work because. And within a couple of minutes, the meeting would go quiet and suddenly nobody's coming up with any suggestions. So this guy, the guy I was working with, would think, well, I'm the only person who can solve this problem. It's all down to me. Everyone else would sit there in silence. And it would take, time then to solve the problem. And it was a laborious process solving the problem. And what I got him to do, so just thinking about the things that we've done in this training, as he talked through the scenario with me, I would see him look up. So I said, just talk me through what happens. And he'd say, well, somebody will say, for example, well, let's try this. And he'd look up and he'd say, well, that won't work. So the question I would ask him was what?
What would work?
Remember, he looked up. There's the clue.
What were you thinking about?
Not just thinking.
What were you seeing?
What were you seeing just then? And what he was doing was he was picturing the problem. He was picturing this person's proposed solution, and he was seeing it failing. And whether he was right or wrong, he was doing that so fast that it was then causing him to shut down that other person. And what's the effect on them?
That they feel they'll just be quiet, then they'll be kind of.
Exactly. So they just think, well, obviously I don't know anything, so I'm just going to shut up then. Why should I help you? And this would go on. And then it was harder and harder for people to come up with suggestions, or to get people to come up with suggestions. So what I had him do, which is very simple, I said to him, just in terms of the way I explained it to him, I said, I think the fact, you've got such a lot of experience that you're able to visualize this thing and you can see why it isn't working. And you do that so fast, it's too fast for them. Of course, that's not exactly true, but it was a metaphor that he could work with that didn't didn't upset him. So it's too fast for them. So what you can do is write down in your notebook what their idea is and why it won't work. And it just slows it all down, and it gives them time to to sort of get their heads around it. Gives everybody else time to get their heads around the idea. Whilst you've already pictured it not working, maybe a couple of minutes ago, you've already done that, but you're too fast for everybody else. You're too good at your job, basically. What does that sound like in Six Step Reframe?
Positive outcomes.
Yeah, it's naming the part, finding the positive intention. He's causing a problem, but he's doing it by trying to be too good at his job. So let's use that metaphor. He likes that metaphor. So we go with that. Write it down. I said that, and then the thing is, obviously, they're not going to like you. They're going to feel intimidated, or they might feel stupid, the fact that you're just shooting their idea down. So what you've got to do is get them to see how stupid their idea is without you saying that to them. You've got to get them to work that out for themselves. And the way you're going to do that is by, instead of saying that won't work because, you're going to say to them, that's interesting. Talk me through how that would work. And then they'll talk themselves through it. They'll realize what a bad idea it is. They'll withdraw their idea, and you won't look like the bad person for making them feel stupid. And he loved that, because that protected his identity, that he's the guy that's got the solutions, and he's just giving people a bit of space to figure out for themselves that he's right and they're wrong. Do you think that's what happened?
Not to get into very specifics here, but most often than not, when they are walking through that idea, maybe that negative outcome is not very clear to them, and it may happen in the real life. And since they are not able to envision themselves, viewing that outcome, that is why they gave the idea in the first place. So no matter how simple it sounds, in real life, only the person who's had an experience of a negative fallout may be able to, visualize it more clearly than the person who's giving that idea.
Right. And we mustn't overlook the obvious point, which is he's the production engineer. So if he already knew the answer, then why is it going wrong in the first place? So the very fact that there is a fault that's causing the production line to stop is evidence that he doesn't know everything. So he's defending that position by making everybody else look stupid.
I'd be interested to know if that technique also gave him the time to actually see that maybe some of the suggestions weren't as stupid as he
Well,
first
that's
thought.
a very interesting thing that happened, because he thought he was going to give these people a chance to talk themselves into a hole and realize the error of their ways. What do you think actually happened?
He got some good ideas.
Yeah, what happened is one person would start talking, well, I think it'll be, and they get a bit of a way along and they'll say, no, that won't work. But then somebody else would say, but if we took that and we did this, and oh no, that wouldn't work. And then somebody else would say, but if we did that and this, and then the result was they reduced their production line downtime by a half. He thought it was faster just to jump straight to the thing that he knew would work. Logically, if we look at the big picture, he couldn't have possibly known the answer, otherwise it wouldn't have broken down in the first place. So it sped up decision making, because what it did was it encouraged the generation of ideas. And although those ideas were not fully formed, they were enough of a seed of an idea for somebody else to build on and somebody else to build on. It actually had the result of accelerating the problem solving and accelerating the the fixing of the problem. And logically, I'm sure we would all acknowledge no one person has all the answers. We know that we need to look at the problem from different angles and different experiences and so on. Creative problem solving is all about doing that. So all of these things which happen in an organizational context, in a team, in sort of team meetings that Paul's talking about there, they also happen inside your head. Because inside your head, you have simulations of people that have been important or influential in your life. And they're all yelling at you, giving you advice, and you don't know which way to turn. And you just want them all to shut up. But that little seed of an idea, that little seed of good advice gets lost. So I'm going to ask you to play along with a little experiment. And you don't have to say anything out loud, but you're just going to give me a nod so I can see that you've got something in mind. I'm asking you all to do this at the same time. So I'm going to think of something that you might do where you would be critical of yourself. You would be hard on yourself. You'd sort of nag yourself or give yourself a hard time afterwards. You might say, oh, idiot, what a stupid thing to say. Oh, I knew that was going to go wrong. I knew that was going to happen. That sort of thing. So if you've got something in mind, what I want you to get in mind is the actual, the criticism that you give yourself. And get in mind what you say to yourself and the voice tone that you say that into yourself. And just give me a nod when you've got that. And what you can notice is you can notice how that makes you feel. Probably makes you feel a bit down, a bit unhappy, a bit dejected maybe. Or it might make you feel like fighting back and resisting and disagreeing with it and getting into an argument with it. So if we just think about this idea of positive intention for a moment, you think about this criticism, there's some part of you that's offering this criticism and it's trying to help you. It just doesn't have it just doesn't do it in a very helpful way. It's trying to be helpful. So the first thing we want to do, and this is true whether it's the voice inside your head or whether it's somebody in a meeting that you're at, first thing we've got to do is acknowledge the positive intention. And the simplest way to do that is by saying what?
You're right.
Well, that would be getting into agreeing with it, but just to acknowledge its intention, the simplest thing to say is,
Okay.
How about thank you? You're not committing to anything. You're not agreeing or disagreeing. You're just saying thank you, as in, you know, I've heard you. I'm acknowledging that you've given me some feedback. So that's the first thing, is the acknowledgement. And that has to be sincere. Not, oh, thank you, but a genuine thank you. And then the second part is to get into a little conversation with it. And the way we're going to do that, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to play that criticism to yourself and then respond to it by saying to yourself inside your head, thank you. Now tell me, how is that feedback useful to me? So do that now and see what happens. What do you notice?
It makes me feel not quite as awful, and I've got a learning outcome.
Interesting. Did it start a little conversation?
Yeah.
How interesting. Anybody else?
It started one, but it was reminding me that it was right.
Okay, fair enough. No need to be. Go on.
Sorry, it softened the initial judgment for me.
Right. Interesting. So I'm going to give you another variation on it, which is you're going to play back the criticism. Thank you. Now, what do you suggest I do differently? Give that one a go. And what do you notice from that one?
You start to come up with solutions.
Yeah. A much better feeling, like, you know, the other one was still, there was a confusion, like what we should have been doing, but here gives better clarity. It's like a better feeling that it should have been like this. So I feel good and positivity there.
I think the voice that offers the solutions is in a much more kinder tone as well.
How interesting. So the voice tone has changed.
Yeah.
And whether it's inside your head or whether it's real people at work, it's amazing how much more agreeable they become when you actually listen to them. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it's amazing what happens when you just listen to people. And do you remember we talked about this earlier, that actually you can't listen neutrally. Just listening is an act which changes something. So there's part of you which has noticed something or noticed something's gone wrong, you know, and sometimes you get critical feedback when there's, you know, you mess something up. There's nothing you could do differently next time because you already knew what you'd done. but just to know that you know that. Yeah, thank you for noticing. Not much else can be said about that. And yet there's other things where actually you could make use of feedback. Just to know that there's a part of you watching over you, and it isn't critical, it's actually trying to be helpful. It's just sometimes not now. So one more try. So hear the criticism again, and this time it's going to be, thank you. Could you let me know that at the right time rather than now when it's too late? Something along those lines. So could you remind me about that when it's the right time for me to do something differently, please? Which is playing on the taking responsibility part of the six-step reframe, isn't it? Take responsibility for change. You've done such a great job of pointing out what I did wrong. It'd be more helpful if you pointed it out at a time that would make a difference. So what happened when you played that one through?
The response was a lot politer.
Wow.
Is it a kind of blaming, a counter blame, like, you know, that you are late to, or it's inappropriate, you're pointing out this time?
Yeah. So here's one last one for you to practice. A weird one, this maybe. Rather than waiting for the criticism to respond to, why don't you take the initiative? You're going to go to that voice and say, okay, what have you got for me today? And what do you notice that time?
Got a list of things I've been avoiding.
Good.
I think more of a positive message.
Wow.
Control. You're controlling it rather than it controlling you.
Yeah, so good. Weird, isn't it?
Mum topped it up on that. And if it wasn't the small ones, it wouldn't have done it.
It's done at 8 o'clock home.
Weird. And it's all you. But, you know, as I said right at the beginning of the course, you are so complex, so so richly complex in your capabilities and your life experiences. You're more than capable of carrying all of these different ideas, creating all of these different realities all at the same time. You're more than capable of simulating in your head everybody you've ever met, every person you've ever had any kind of interaction or relationship with. You're more than capable of going to any person you've ever met in your life and asking, what would they do in this situation? And probably being right. And all these resources that you have to draw on. And the way that your brain represents that some of these resources to you, to your conscious awareness, is as if they, you know, there's a voice inside your head, or as if you can picture things in your mind that you can imagine about the future and so on. And so if we learn to interact with some of those representations in a way that's more useful. There can be a hugely valuable source of information. And I think often people are taught to feel bad about criticism and the judgment that it's attached to it. And what that does is it makes us lose the value of the information that's contained within it. Makes us lose the value of the feedback, because we can't navigate anywhere without feedback. And while you're focusing on one thing that you're doing in life, there's a lot of other stuff happening as well that's that you perhaps haven't thought about. But as Paul said, it's all there. You remember it, you know, all the things that you should have done, or all the things that you should have done differently. And actually finding a way to incorporate that into the decisions that you make in the here and now is much more useful than just kicking yourself for getting it wrong last time, because that doesn't change anything. All it does is attempt to preempt anybody else from doing it for you. So you just learn to criticize yourself to stop anybody else from doing it. Which I think is perhaps a comment on how most of us have experienced feedback in our lives, that it isn't always given in a way that's most productive. However, it's never too late to change all of that. And if you also think about the way that you give feedback to other people as well, you can change a huge amount, you know, people's judgment of themselves and their, you know, the freedom and the creativity that they put into new things. Or, you know, if you're a manager and you're delegating to people, the way you give people feedback in delegating will make a massive difference to their enthusiasm and creativity and innovation that they bring to a task. So it's all useful stuff to bear in mind. So I think it's getting pretty much time for us to wrap up for today, because there's nothing else that we need to do. What we're going to concentrate on tomorrow is practice and putting all of this together, piecing all these different bits of the puzzle together into what we might recognize as coaching sessions. And so what I would like you to do between now and tomorrow is to think about the kind of things that come up for you at work, where you might find yourself wanting to coach somebody or wanting to use the sort of techniques that we've been practicing. And think about, in those same situations, what are the kind of things that you would sometimes like help with? What are some of the things that you might be finding challenging, or some of the goals that you have that you've not really had the chance to think through or explore yet? So when we're coaching, obviously we're focusing on goals, we're focusing on future outcomes. However, we've also got to recognize the fact that when a person comes to you for help, they're already at the point where they feel like things are going wrong. So if you're in a position where you are organizing some sort of coaching program with somebody who didn't ask for that, but they're getting it as part of something like a graduate program or inducting a new employee or something like that, then that's great, because you're starting with this blank sheet of paper with, you know, we don't need to be talking to each other, but we are, and I'm going to be able to help you. So what sort of things do you want to work on? In that sense, you're more likely to get stuff presented to you that's more aspirational, more future focused. But normally, if you've got people coming to you and saying, here's a problem that I've got, or, you know, I want your help with this, they're normally going to be at some sort of point where they've had enough, or something has happened, something has changed. And so we're starting from that more negative, more remedial focus. But obviously what you'll be doing is as quickly as possible, you'll be focusing them on, okay, so this has happened. That's the reason why we're talking. But, you know, this is just one example. Let's focus on the future. Let's make this a forward-looking conversation rather than just fixing the one problem that's presented itself today. Because, you know, I'm sure many of you have experienced, and I think, you know, you've talked about this before, that if all you do is just solve people's problems, they'll just keep coming back to you with the same problems. And you'll think, Why are we having this conversation? This is like the 6th time this person's been back to me with the same thing. Why aren't they listening? Why aren't they learning anything? And they are. They're learning the most important thing of all, which is that if they come and ask you for help, you'll take the problem off their hands and do it for them. What better thing is there to learn than that from their point of view? And so if we want to not only help them to solve the problem, but also to help them to become more self-directed, more responsible, have more autonomy, more independence in that, which ultimately is, they're going to feel better about, is going to be more sustainable for them, is going to give them, more sustainable solutions, more ownership of what they're doing. It's not necessarily an easy thing to redirect them onto that, but that's really that's where we have to focus our attention with that sort of conversation. And I know many of you are in jobs where your starting point for the coaching conversation will be that the person's gotten to some sort of crisis point where something has gone wrong to such a degree that now they're going to stop self-medicating and actually talk to a professional, i.e. you. So we're going to do some practice tomorrow. So between now and tomorrow, do think of some subjects that you would like to explore in those practice sessions. And as I say, not problems to solve, but goals that you have in life, or things that you've kind of had at the back of your mind for some time, but you've not really gotten around to properly organizing those ideas and planning the things that you want and overcoming maybe some of the obstacles to that. So that'd be useful. If we're going to have some practice sessions, I want you to get something out of those that's going to be really valuable for you personally. So why not? So we're going to look at putting all of these different things together into coaching sessions. We're going to practice some of that, and then that's going to set you up then very well for your individual assessment sessions. And if you've got any questions about those, and I can answer those tomorrow. And between now and tomorrow, go easy on yourself. Remember those conversations that you had around the self-criticism, that remember to be critical is just to notice difference. There's no judgment in that, but we put a judgment on it. If you've done something wrong, or you missed something, or you didn't do something as well as you could have done, that's a bad thing. And of course, actually, from my point of view as a trainer, the best thing that you can possibly do ever is make a mistake. Because if you always get things right first time, it's a sign of what?
Waited too long.
Maybe, yeah.
Things are too easy, you're treading water.
Yeah, you've set your bar so low that actually you can just get everything right first time. It's a sign of maybe playing a bit safe. So if what we want is to maximize learning, then it's valuable to put people into situations, and as a coach, it's a great asset to be able to do this, into situations where they can make mistakes, but do it in a way which is more controlled or safe for them. It's very important that they're not going to cause anybody any real harm, but they can get things wrong and screw things up, and and learn from it. Because if you get things right first time, you don't learn anything. You just learn to carry on doing the same things. And one thing we know about carrying on doing the same things is one day when the world changes and those things don't work anymore, you'll be in a much more difficult position than the person who's got lots of flexibility and lots of choice, having made lots of very interesting mistakes along the way. So I'll leave you with that thought, to be kind to yourselves this evening, and to think of some useful areas that you'd like to explore tomorrow in those practice sessions.